Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Matthew, good to see you. How are you?
Joe, I'm doing well. Can't actually see you, but we're talking on the phone for this episode. But that's good because you're...
Let's remove the mystery here. I'm in California. I'm in Sonoma, just south of major cannabis country in Mendocino, which apparently is still burning. You are where?
I am back here in New York City in Brooklyn.
Okay, good. So it's nice to hear from you. I'm looking forward to the show tonight. You know, here I am in California, and all everybody's talking about is Canada. And Canada is buying up what's around in California because they can. So I want to talk about how our America First policy by the current person in the White House is really ignoring the cannabis industry. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. But first, what news have you come up with this week? Have you seen anything of interest?
I have indeed, and I'd love to talk to you about it.
Tell me.
So interesting, Joe, that you bring up the current administration and their stance on the world of cannabis, because a report is getting ready to come out. This comes from an article in Forbes magazine that is saying that the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, is adjusting their drug quotas for 2019. And in the world of cannabis, they are going to increase the drug quota from 1,000 pounds, which is what it currently is in 2018, to more than 5,400 pounds of production. So, Joe, this is your favorite farm down in Mississippi?
Oh, yes. That's great. So the DEA is actually raising cannabis production in the United States, huh? Isn't that good?
That's correct. A lot of this has to do with a couple of internal reports that the DEA was working on about allowing additional producers to grow. So these drug quotas are set for medical testing and research study inside the United States, right?
It's the only, the only cannabis that's allowed to be used in the United States, the capital of cannabis production. The 5,000 pounds that's grown in Mississippi is the only cannabis they can use in research. Believe it or not.
And yeah, so that's next year will be 5,000 pounds. This year it was limited to 1,000 pounds, which stacked up why it was so difficult for anyone to be able to get any cannabis from them. Another piece of that is that they are looking at more than a dozen applications from competitive growers so that they can be licensed to produce federal weed for the DEA as well.
You know, I actually know somebody who's trying to go for one of those licenses based in California. So let's just say he was really smart, and let's just say it's really about time, huh?
It really is, and I hope that what it is a signal that we're going to see more federally financed and federally backed study and research, especially in the medical world for cannabis.
Oh, they can look. If they don't do that now, they're just ceding it to everybody else. So somebody's on top of this, which is one good sign about the U.S. government today, given all the bad signs we keep hearing about. So that's good.
Second up item of news, and this is quite an interesting one, but apparently the race is on, formally and officially, to become the premier and premium cannabis brand in the industry. And a lot of merging and acquisition is going on in this regard.
That's for sure. That's not a secret. That is for sure. Who are they nominating for the high brands? Who are they saying?
Well, it's quite an interesting and complex story. So I'm pulling from several articles here, some from NBC, some internal press release things, but basically a very popular Canadian brand, Canopy Growth Corp. I think you might know.
The biggest Canopy, yes.
So they are producers of cannabis. They have acquired the company Haiku, which is basically a retail and brand front. They're not producers. They're just marketers and sellers. So they acquired the entire company. They went through a very weird legal loophole to do it. They've actually bought out negotiations for them to be acquired by another company. And then the news this week is that after that successful acquisition, they have had an injection of $4 billion from Constellation Brands, which you may not know the name of, but you probably are familiar with their product, Corona Beer.
They own everything. And that was a $4 billion or you said $4 billion infusion.
Billion with a B. Corona, the Constellation Brands enterprise and company is going down big. $4 billion investment into Canopy Growth Corp.
This is, again, been predicted for a very long time, and we are now seeing the beginning of big cannabis. This is it. We are watching it happen.
It definitely puts them. It puts them in direct competition now with what is currently considered to be the Starbucks of weed, which is MedMen.
Interesting. I think they're going to far surpass MedMen pretty quickly. But what do I know? It's very early days. But look, somebody has to be the Corona of weed, right? This is
exactly. And there seems to be a gold rush going on. Kush Bottles, which is actually a supplemental company, they're not even in the cannabis business per se. They're more tertiary. Has actually acquired Zach Darling Creative Associates, which is an entire design and marketing firm. And this is just for making packaging.
Yeah.
And this goes all the way up now to where there's an article that you can find in Adweek, and I think we'll put it out on our Twitter. Adweek is discussing the best current cannabis brands and a trend in the industry to sort of be less like the dodgy bag that you buy on the corner and more like Whole Foods.
Of course. Didn't we talk about this other story that was in Gizmodo about a new bag, the new packaging that we're seeing with cannabis all over the place?
Yeah, this is definitely a part of that. When you have Gizmodo talking about how things are being packaged and premiumly branded, it's really a sea change. You know, for the longest time, cannabis growers and producers in the fight to get it legalized have been focusing on the quality of the plant, right? Growing the plant, cleaning up the plant, testing the plant. Now this focus is shifting towards how do we package it? How do we make something?
We have to show and tell consumers who don't know the difference what the better thing is. It's exactly like the bottles of alcohol, right? The more expensive and fancy designed the alcohol, the more you think it's going to be better, and certainly the more you're willing to pay for it. Correct? I don't think we're going to see anything different. I think it's going to be the same. So my advice is find the grower you like, find the strains you like, and make really good friends with them.
Yeah, and maybe if you got a little bit of extra money kicking around, find them on their IPO and get invested.
Yes, exactly.
So last piece of news for you, Joe. It's the premium brand race is not the only race worth talking about this week. Their race also seems to be on between two companies to market and create the first reliable marijuana breathalyzer.
I saw
a company out of California.
I saw one of those when I was in Israel a couple of years ago. They are really unsexy. This is the last way you want to use cannabis. They're thinking so prohibition, right? Oh, we can hide this. No one will know it's not a breathalyzer. But do you really want to use your cannabis through a breathalyzer? You tell me.
I'm sorry?
Do you really want to take your cannabis through a breathalyzer?
No, I think you might have misunderstood. This is for law enforcement, Joe.
Oh, to take a test, to take a driving test.
Yeah, exactly. These are field sobriety tests, breathalyzer tests that test for THC molecules in your breath. A company called Hound Labs has a product now that can apparently detect molecules of THC in the parts per trillion on the human breath. And within a 2-hour window, which they are calling the peak impairment time, which makes a lot of sense, this device can deliver a yes or no response to the presence of THC in a person's breath.
Interesting. So I'm right. This is a very unsexy thing for using cannabis.
It is a very unsexy thing, but it's also
useful.
I think it's also very important. It's also very important as we move into this world of legalization. Obviously, we all know that there are laws and standards and statutes in place for impaired driving with alcohol. There's a test for it. There are limits set for it. And that's been a very gray area in the world of cannabis. So hopefully these devices, or at least the presence of these devices, can force people to really start paying attention to this, because we don't want dangerous drivers out on the street. There's a big snag, however, in the fact that how do you possibly measure that? How do you measure how affected someone is? I may be able to sit down and smoke a gram of cannabis and not be okay. I know a couple other people who might be able to smoke 3-4 grams and barely be affected at all.
I don't know. Maybe it's the same as alcohol. Maybe you have to really just be smart and not use 1 hour before you drive or 2 hours before you drive. Maybe that's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah, it looks like this 2-hour window thing. Well, and I think one of the best quotes that comes out of the CNN article was they spoke to David Downs, who is someone I'm sure you're familiar with over at Leafly. And he had the best quote, which was, just take a lift.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Matthew.
Joe and I will continue to publish every episode of the Brave New Weed podcast for free for you, our listeners. But we could always use your support. If you've got a little extra change rattling around in your pocket, you can cruise over to patreon.com/bravenewweed and become a supporter of the show. Everything that you'd pledge to support helps us to increase the guests that we can have on the show, even eventually the frequency of the show. And we have a great set of rewards out there, including copies of Joe's book, invites to special events that we will do in New York City, all sorts of fun things. So if you're enjoying the podcast and you would like to support us, visit patreon.com/bravenewweed today.
As we said in the top of the show, everywhere you go, especially in California these days, all you hear is Canada. Canada's buying up every small shop. This one is going public on the Canadian Stock Exchange. This one is going into business with this Canadian retailer. And what continually astounds me is that we're under a regime that promotes America first, yet it is completely ignoring the burgeoning cannabis industry. I mean, Canada, great country, only 40 million people. America, 340 million people. So the balance seems completely off to me as to why Canada is taking the lead here, and that no one seems to be bringing up the fact that this is in stark contradiction to what's his name's policies. So with me tonight, we have Steve Klein, who's the CEO of a company called Flowr, who's going to try to explain this to us and tell us what is really going on in Canada and why this is happening. Steve Klein, Chairman and Chief Strategist of Flowr. Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Steve, we're talking to Steve tonight. I'm particularly interested in talking to you because you are a New Yorker, but who has a big business in Canada. And it has long been in the back of my mind a contention that Trump is basically giving the cannabis industry away to Canada by not pushing forward federal legalization. What's your take on that? Give me a high overview for me, please.
Sure. Yeah, I would say that's not untrue. That certainly the Trump administration is not pushing forward the agenda that seems to be the sensible one when it comes to legalization. And at the same time, it's really not all his fault on this one.
Tell me why, please.
Again, before he's gotten into office for years, it's been a Schedule I drug, as you know, and there's been an unreasonable restriction in terms of its legality from the beginning as states started to pioneer the idea. And we have some of the most mature markets in the world, state by state. But from a federal point of view, it's been illegal. Obviously, the Cole memo that the Clinton administration put out and that it was called into question, which is part of, I think, what
it was rescinded by Jeff Beauregard Sessions. Okay, let's just be clear what happened there. It was the Obama administration, not the Clinton administration.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say the Clinton administration? Of course, the Obama administration. And yes, it was rescinded for a moment. I think the markets panicked for a moment, but recovered quickly. And like a lot of things that come out of the administration, folks don't always assume will come true if they're sort of completely out of the realm of what will be accepted by Congress. And actually, this is one of the few things that was bipartisan, where plenty of not just Republicans in blue states, but plenty of red states who have legalized medicinally want to get their patients medicine, want to make the money off of taxes.
But do you think that Trump is giving away the industry to Canada for the time being? I mean, it seems like there is a huge opening and the Canadians are just not even rushing to fill it, just walking casually in.
Well, I would disagree with the walking casually part. It's actually exploded. But yes, you're not wrong that A, it's exploded recently, and B, the Trump administration has been a hindrance, not a help to the progress. But before that happened, the U.S. government, handed the lead to Canada, which is the oldest system since 2001, Supreme Court decree, and a sort of very rough self-grow system for a lot of years, very nascent. Docs were afraid to prescribe. People had to grow for themselves. 2014, they made a commercial for medicinally, federally legal, and they're by far the most sort of advanced system in the world because of that. And now Justin Trudeau, who ran on legalization, and they just passed, and it's about to go legal in October, is another part of the dynamic. And now Germany and many other big countries around the world are going medicinally legal, but don't have production. So Canada will be sort of the main hub for export and have the recreational market. And the US could have had it if they had made that action. There's no doubt the money would have come here versus Canada if they had made the first move. That does predate Trump, but he certainly hasn't helped.
And from what when I was last in California, everybody I know was saying, well, we're a small company and the Canadians are here to buy us up, not the Americans, because the Americans can't because of the state barriers. So it seems to me that the Canadians are not at all stupid about this. They see exactly what's going on and they're buying up all these small businesses. Are you aware of this? Is this part of what's generally known to be going on?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are a couple of dynamics going on with U.S. and Canada. I mean, one of them is exactly what you're saying. There's several companies that went public in Canada. Again, the huge difference between U.S. and Canada initially for the last several years is because Canada's federally legal medicinally, you can have bank accounts, you can have credit cards, you can go public, you can tap the public markets. Now, first tier banks with U.S. connections because of the FDIC and other U.S. ties didn't touch it. So it was the second tier sort of banks in Canada. It wasn't the BMOs and those kinds of banks in Canada because they had too many contacts with US banks and went after it. Now they're getting involved, as are some US banks like Cowen and others. Not the top tier banks yet, but some top tier in Canada. It's federally legal. It's a legal thing. And there is some interesting cross-border stuff going on that you sort of touched on. There have been for several years, there's the not as prominent exchange, the CSE in Canada versus the TSX, sort of like the pink sheets versus, the NASDAQ or whatever in the US. And the TSX, which is a US public company and doesn't allow anybody on the TSX to own US assets, that isn't true of the CSE. You can own US assets. So there have been companies that went public in Canada, tapped the public markets there, and went buying in the US. There's mixed reviews on how well they've bought and how well they've developed the U.S. businesses from there. But more recently, there have been a few U.S. Businesses that have been multi-state, blocking state by state, like MedMen and GTI, that just went public on the CSE like a month ago and are literally have post-billion-dollar market caps.
So when I hear all this, what drives me crazy is that here we're having these ridiculous trade wars over nothing, right? And there is an enormous opportunity to not have a war, but in fact to open up markets. And I mean, I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, but it just seems like we are wasting so much energy, so much negative shit where there's this possibility to really open up into the positive, and they're just so blind to it. I like to think they're stupid. I'm not sure they're stupid or venal.
Yeah, I mean, again, you want to look at the positive side of things.
You do.
I do. And I'm talking about the U.S. now. What is it? 31 states that have now gone. Is that 80% of the population live in those states? Many of them, host Republican governors and senators and obviously many congressmen. Again, I do think the momentum's one way. I do think there's some last minute, barriers to get through. I know a lot of people don't think it's for years from now, but as you know, there was legislation very recently, bipartisan, introduced in both the Senate and the House. When does that happen for anything? Again, when the Cole memo was rescinded, when did you see Republicans challenge this administration on the floor? It didn't happen. There's again, and it's a perfectly Republican issue. States' rights, states' determination, business. There's billions of dollars in ecosystems per state. There's tons of tax revenue being raised. There's jobs. There's state determination. It's a one-way train, I think, no matter what.
Yeah, but my final bit of rancor here, as a diehard progressive, it just pisses me off that Republicans and conservatives might be able to grab the energy on this one. Okay, so that's my piece. All right, now let's talk about what's really going on in Canada, because all these people I see and hear and meet are telling me, wow, Joe, you should see the grow facilities and the technology and the progress that's really happening there. Can you give me a bird's eye view of some things you've seen that have just really gone, wow, they're blowing us away?
This is going to be a tough one for me. Well, because I don't only think I'm one of them. I think I'm one of the rare ones, honestly. So yeah. So blow your own horns, okay, I'll try to. My partner Tom Flowr, who founded MedRelief, and MedRelief, especially their first facility in Markham that Tom first designed and built and developed the cultivation SOPs for, and the rest of it, is known as sort of the highest quality, highest yielding per foot, which is a very important metric that isn't paid a lot of attention to in Canada.
What is a high yield per foot in Canada?
Like any other real estate business, they're typically measured on productivity per foot. It's a fairly straightforward calculus, and in my opinion, that's what leads to profitable cultivation. And the wow moment, let's get back to your question, rather than make a commercial for myself. The wow moment, I think, is in the industrial commercial sort of system. Again, it was this mom and pop, aggregate grower system with 2,000 patients until 2014 by Supreme Court decree. Then the legislature actually put in a commercial system and said, we're going to give licenses to commercial growers, and the bigger they can scale, the better. And you had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square feet of canopy developed. And I think that's the wow, is that, wow, people are putting this much money. People are raising this much money because you can go public and tap the public markets. There's a tremendous enthusiasm that drives up the price of these stocks and the market cap, because, as I said, Canada has the lead, and there's a legitimacy to these companies will potentially grow into and pass their valuations. And at the same time, like any other incredible growth industry, it's hard to tell where the value lies. And so the wow moment, I think, is in the scale of it all, is in, people growing million square foot facilities and that sort of thing. Productivity wise, yield per foot and quality, being able to pass Health Canada inspection without irradiating the product in these gigantic facilities is very, very difficult. It's it's a hard thing to make sure you're treating a mass amount of plants with systems and getting the productivity per foot, the fatness of the plant per foot, that the yield I was talking about, and B, the quality, and not just on passing Health Canada regulations. Tom would kick me for using that as a proxy for quality. I only mention that because every single greenhouse grower, I suspect, because people don't report on these things, but every single greenhouse grower must be irradiating, because how do you control mold without being able to control humidity?
Let's talk about that word, the I word, irradiation. I don't think many people are aware of this, but it's a law in Canada, correct? That the product must be?
No, it's not a law that it must be. It's that I estimate probably 90% is. There's no reporting on this, but because Health Canada is a federal regulator, there is no federal regulation in the States by the FDA because it's federally illegal. Well, maybe and maybe not. It depends on there's a lot of mixed science on irradiation, and I'm not going to pretend that there's anything absolute. One thing I will say is absolute though about irradiation. First of all, if you have X number of particles of mold or pests or whatever, you're not going to pass Health Canada inspection because you send to pharma labs. That's not how it works state by state. There are individual labs that are set up to test, and it's less stringent regulation than in Canada or in Germany that just legalized, or any of the countries that have gone federally legal on the health side. And the reason for that is if you're going to smoke it, it matters more what's on it than if you're going to eat it, right? So like a tomato, there should be more regulation on pesticides and mold and a bunch of things if you're going to smoke and inhale it. And that's why Health Canada has taken this stance. So has Germany and all the other sort of first world countries. And I think the US will too when it becomes federally legal.
Tell me how irradiation affects the taste, the quality, the smell of cannabis, because it's got to kill some stuff, some of the nice things. Tell me specifically your experience. Yeah, I mean, there's arguments both ways, but and again, if you don't pass inspection in Canada, you have to irradiate. Now, you would estimate, all greenhouse and most indoor grow product has to get irradiated at the end of the day, and there's different science. I've read it introduces carcinogens. Again, I can't say absolutely that's true. It's an article I read yesterday. Can you taste the difference? Yes. I mean, I think it strongly affects the terpene profile, and people who do it, claim that it doesn't materially affect the terpene profile, but admit it does. And it reduces, I think, most of the terpenes, like in the 20% range, the papers that have been published. But it also spikes certain terpenes. And unfortunately for the people that have to irradiate, the typical terpenes it spikes are things associated with the taste and smell of things like carrots and wood and ash, and the things that would make the aesthetic experience, even from a good bud originally, not a great aesthetic experience. What are the terpenes associated with carrots, woods, and ash? Because those are ones I've never come across. Well, because I don't think people brag about them in the terpene profile. I think for the lemon and pine tastes more than the. Do you know the names? I don't, and I'm not a scientist, and I shouldn't pretend to be one. I know enough to be dangerous, as they say, as somebody who's interested in this stuff and hangs around Tom Flowr and the scientists in the company. Can you see the difference in irradiated weed? I think the answer to that is yeah. First of all, it starts with the genetics, right? Because it's going to alter a terpene profile. It depends what the terpenes are going into the irradiation process. And so I think some product wears better than others. I think none of it wears particularly well. Tom told me an anecdotal story that they, for testing purposes, irradiated a bunch of batches at MedRelief when he was back there in the day, just to sort of taste test the difference. And 100% of the time they could taste and smell the difference. And again, that's not a scientific study and it's anecdotal, but it's a medicinal market right now in Canada. So I don't think the issues come up a ton. People are happy to get their medicine. A lot of them haven't smoked before. When it goes, adult use rec, and it goes from 300,000 patients to 5 to 8 million users in October of this year, I do anticipate the people that bought on the black market comparing their experience to the experience they're having in the stores. And when I say in the stores, I'll put that in air quotes because a lot of it will be online, because obviously the system has to get rolled out by the government. And I don't think there'll be the number of stores available to service clients by that time. But they will have an online presence. And again, they're going to compare their experience. And I think, the notion of irradiation will become apparent to the more experienced smokers, and will become an issue and will become an edge for Flowr, and why, I personally invested in Tom. That plus the fact that, again, yield, ensures grow. I mean, again, the Canadian markets are public, so you can see certain of the numbers. There's very few people growing at a profit.
And again, you can't see exactly behind the numbers. You can't see what is expanded, G&A expenses, because they're building big armies and footprints. And there's some very big companies that have done a great job in terms of scaling and raising money and buying supply chain and a whole bunch of things. But I don't know of a lot of companies that grow at scale profitably when you look at the numbers. And again, I'm guessing, I can't know for sure, but I'm just guessing there just isn't enough expense in the other things they're doing to build their companies to imply that they're growing at a profit. And it's hard at scale. So the more scale they take on, I think the harder it'll be for them. And it's it's the big reason I invested in Tom. It's the big reason I think we have our edge is we're going to grow profitably at scale because of yield and because of quality. And one last thing I have to mention, because Tom would kick me, is quality is nurturing the genetics. It's not just passing Health Canada inspection. It's nurturing the genetics. It's getting consistency with every batch. So when either a patient or a consumer, for recreational purposes, likes something and they come back, it's the same thing. I mean, it's obviously consistency is a very important part of protocol in pharmaceuticals. This is a nutraceutical, right? There's not FDA testing. So it is what it is. And nobody's going to get it absolutely perfectly every time, but I believe Tom will get it, and Tom and his team will get it, very, very close.
I want you to talk a little bit about Tom's background with Miracle-Gro, which is a little scary sounding. But first, I want to ask you another question. Has there ever been a famous Canadian strain? How come I've never heard of one? Oh, I got to have that Kelowna Kula Whip or whatever it's called. I mean, how come I've never heard of any Canadian genetics?
This is where being a New Yorker is going to cost me. I'm fairly new to the Canadian market myself. Tom's going to really kick me after this. I can tell you this: BC Bud is a branded expression. Kelowna and the Okanagan Valley, where Kelowna resides, is famous, just like the west coast of California is. So from that point of view, and by the way, there's plenty of science going on at university that's funded, that's been legal because it's been legal there. Again, we are on that side of the border, far more sophisticated, and getting to the relationship with Scott's Miracle-Gro subsidiary, Hawthorne Gardening. Miracle-Gro obviously is a public company in Ohio. It's the premier picks and shovels, for services for home and gardening, and has tremendous expertise in botany and the rest of it. They, I think, recognize correctly that this is going to be a gigantic growth industry. Early on, created a subsidiary of theirs, Hawthorne Gardening, which has been both developing and acquiring companies that are in the space and have really developed the most robust by far globally, picks and shovels support kind of company that they are for the cannabis space. They obviously would like to do R&D on these top companies that they own, and like Gavita Lighting and a bunch of others. They aren't going to touch the plant themselves. They're not in that business. So they were looking for someone that was trusted, that can do that R&D work in an alliance with them together. And I think they had the same confidence in Tom that I did from the early days, because I've known them for years. And when we got our license, in Canada, we signed the deal with them to grow, to design and build a 50,000 square foot R&D facility, the first of its kind I know of. We say in North America, but then, and I can't, guarantee the due diligence on that, but it's really the first of its kind I know of in the world, quite frankly. It's going to be a purpose-built R&D ground up construction. We should be breaking ground, I think, by September, right next door to our flagship facility in the Kelowna campus, right next door to our first facility. We also have land right next to us on the other side for our next facility. We also have agricultural land across the street, which is a backdrop of gorgeous mountains that we hope to build some, greenhouses for just high-end extracted product. I mean, our thesis is that it's going to be the high-end product that A is going to be the most sort of sought after, B is going to be the most in supply, and at the end of the day is going to be the real product to be consumed by smoking, because once you're extracting and you get past the oil and you go into the molecule to insert into an edible or a drinkable or a pill, I can claim that Tom's expertise and his team's expertise, is the differentiator. We'll develop brand off of our expertise in the flower quality, as well as we plan to do the greenhouses so we can grow great flower in greenhouses, but extract for vape pen oil, because oil does still matter. But once you get to the molecule, I think it's less of a concern.
So let me get clear. You're not only automating everything, you're still going to have a sort of an artisanal level of product. Is that what your vision is to have sort of a high end, much like wine, like we could produce a whole bunch of $12 a bottle wine, but we're going to produce a limited amount of that $212 bottle. Is that correct?
I would say it's more like, it's funny. Wine is my favorite analogy, much more than beer, because the grapes versus the barley and the hops and that sort of thing. But it's even more so in cannabis, especially at scale with Health Canada regulation. To get quality bud and grown at a profit is really, I believe, difficult for everyone, including us. I mean, Tom works as hard as anybody I've ever seen. And, we're getting the facility up and running, which it is. But until he dials in the way he likes, he's going to be working on it night and day. And it's just hard, but it's exactly what you say. It's artisanal quality stuff that's going to get better and better over time, quite frankly. And the ability to grow it at scale. But it's not about automation. I mean, it's partly about automation. Our place looks like a rocket ship, but it's not automation for automation's sake. Tom stays away from he'll kick me again when I call him old school sometimes, but it's not because he's old school. It's because it doesn't make sense to employ the latest and greatest every time. So some of our stuff looks older, in terms of the technology, like, the choice of lights and various things. Now, Tom custom crafts them and manufactures them in China, so they look like nobody's. But yeah, it's not about, being the fanciest, although our place looks very, very fancy and high tech. But there's plenty of areas where we won't automate. We'll automate where it makes sense, and that'll iterate over time, because Tom, is always thinking about the better way to do it.
I want to ask you, like you said, good quality stuff. This is a catchphrase that doesn't have a lot of meaning to me, because for me, it's not about strength. I don't need 28% THC flower to have a good experience. As a matter of fact, I actually prefer a lower THC flower. Okay. So how important is flavor and sort of nuance and the things that you were talking about, terpenes? How are you, first of all, A, is that important to you guys? B, who's watching that? And C, is it only going to be super industrial strength cannabis that blows your head off? Or is it going to be honestly, I wish you guys would just develop a 7% THC CBD strain so I could just get through the whole movie and, on a casual joint.
we will, and we do. Promise me. We will, and we do. It's funny. I'm not as conversant as I should be in the strains at this point, but I believe ice cream. It's about 10 and 10. Ice cream. I believe so. And has a vanilla. We've actually got a partnership with a very cool millennial-oriented beer brand in Ontario that's really taken off in the last couple of years. The beer is Ace Hill, and their cannabis brand will be Ace Valley. And they appeal to a demographic I'm not a part of. I'm an old guy, but again, just like in the beers, my generation loves the IPAs and the heavy alcohol content, and the heavier the better for me, quite frankly. And I will probably use THC as a partial proxy for quality too. But yeah, no, there's tons of people that agree with you. And I agree with you in terms of the aesthetics of the experience. And, it's a matter of nurturing the genetics for whatever you're trying to produce. I mean, there'll be strains that are mostly CBD and very little THC. Absolutely. Absolutely. It has to be. It has to be both to appeal to the different, consumers. I mean, again, we're producing that very high cost bottle of wine or whatever the analogy is, but we're going to be doing it at very similar prices to other people. So we're going to be able to compete across markets, but deliver higher quality experiences, I think, across the board. That's certainly the plan. And I think it's totally achievable, and it's not going to just be about THC, although that is obviously something of a proxy for value at times and a source of pride if you drive that up.
So, Canada has undergone an enormous up in its reputation and its image, thanks to both Trump and Justin Trudeau. Okay. Do you think cannabis is going to really sort of skyrocket the image of Canada going further into the future?
I absolutely do. I mean, it's already. I mean, again, it
is the maple leaf going to be replaced by the cannabis leaf?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I, like you, view it as sort of a very productive, drug, both medicinally as well as recreationally. I think it's the safest recreational drug that gives you the most benefits, and I think it's incredibly safer than a bunch of other things that are on the medical market for sleep and pain and a bunch of other ailments, and far more effective. And that just scratches the surface, from Crohn's disease to a million other things that I've come across through scientists and the rest of it. So I think the markets are going to be gigantic. I think the winners of these spaces are going to be gigantic. And I think it's, the very happy circumstance of doing well by doing good. I mean, if you do a good company and you make a lot of money and you provide a lot of good experiences for a better price, and, everybody wins. I mean, it's just one of the exciting things about it.
So the whole country of Canada is going to do better by doing good, right? Thank you, Steve Klein, the CEO and chairman the chairman and chief strategist of Flowr, the company you are going to be hearing a lot about.
Hi, listeners. We are always on the lookout for great things to talk about on the Brave New Weed podcast, and we'd love to hear from you. You can always email us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com with links to articles, interesting news stories, personal accounts of things that you've done, or leads on books or products that we should know about. You can always contact us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com.
Thanks so much, Steve. It was really great to talk to you. Matthew, I want to tell you about something really interesting. So when we interviewed Jamie Wheel, we got a note from one of my favorite people. His name is Jason Silva. Do you know Jason Silva?
Yeah, I'm actually quite familiar with some of his public speaking work. He's done some really great stuff with TED and a couple of great...
Jason's like a wonder junkie. He is obsessed with the idea of wonder and awe. And he's obsessed with trying to help us regular old folks, just as I am, really, try to bring a little more wonder and awe into our lives. Anyway, we've been communicating on social, and it looks like we're both going to meet up next week and do an interview. For one thing, I'm really curious about Jason because even though I've listened to him a lot and watched his extraordinary videos, which are sort of like LSD on the screen, really, I don't know much about Jason. I think his background is a bit mysterious. So I'm really looking forward to meeting him, talking to him. Is there anything you want to know from Jason, Matthew?
Anything and everything, Joe. If you have an opportunity to sit down, just pick his brain for as long as you can keep him talking.
He's got a good brain, definitely, and he's a great talker. And you know what he told me? I asked him, I said, "Hey, Jason, who writes your scripts?" And he said, "I don't use scripts. I just talk."
He just goes, huh?
He just goes. So I want to know what he's on, what he does, and I want some of that. I'll tell you that much. So tune in next episode, and we'll have Jason and Matthew. Great to talk to you. Greetings from California. I will see you shortly.
Great to talk to you too. Bring me back something nice, would you?
Yeah, I have a few ideas. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.